because you have a background also in writing for these big publications that people want to get mentioned in, right? And then you're also a marketer who's presumably like working on maybe PR campaigns for brands and clients. So you've seen both sides of this marketplace.
Yeah.
What's the myth? What's the misconception that most people have about PR?
Are we recording this? Like, yeah. Are we on this point? Oh, okay.
And we could cut in whenever we want. We can cut out. Yeah.
Totally. I think the biggest thing is like, okay, I'm going to back it up and say I've been doing some form of PR for probably the last 14 years. And 14 years ago, it was really, really easy if you were a good writer to get an unknown person on the news. Mm-hmm. At the PR firm I worked for, we did it all the time. You did not have to be relatively famous or anything. For example, one time we got this doctor on the news. It was like on the homepage of Yahoo talking about Kim Kardashian's baby. This was an OBGYN who was commenting on a condition that Kim Kardashian's baby had. Not Kim Kardashian's doctor. She was just commenting on the condition. Her line blew up after she got on the homepage of Yahoo because everybody assumed she was Kim Kardashian's doctor. And so in that case, yeah, it was kind of crazy because all of a sudden she got more business than she could handle. And it was just like, it was a bit overwhelming. But then there'd be other times where we would get somebody on like a really great, like, I'm talking like top tier morning show, and their phones weren't ringing off the hook. So back in those days, we always had to kind of tell people, you don't know what's going to happen. You prepare, but don't be upset if like your phones aren't ringing off the hook, though maybe they are. Now, a lot of people have publicists. Startups back in those days did not have PR firms as much. They were expensive, et cetera. There's also a lot more media outlets now. What I liken it to is my husband's an actor, for example. He's doing this at a time where there are a lot of streaming networks. You can be on a top show and nobody knows who you are. But like our neighbor was on a famous show back in the 70s, back when there were like 4 channels. Everybody knows who this particular guy is. But that was like before. That was back when there weren't so many outlets. Now there's so many outlets. There's so much media. There's all these streaming platforms. The game has changed, essentially. And so public relations is not just about publicity. It's literally about creating these relationships with your publics, what we call your publics, which is like your customers, your outside stakeholders, your board members, people that are public, that are not like internal in the company. You need to develop relationships with them. And that is through podcasts, through social media, through other means. And publicity is just one little part of that.
Do you consider, because it feels like the big trend there, I'm maybe reading into the lines too much, but it's like centralization to decentralization of where people pay attention. So like if we, in like a supply and demand sense, right? Like we have attention as the demand side, and that's finite because you and me and whatever group of people who are viewing media, we only have so many hours in a day or minutes that we can pay attention to a thing, right? And if there's only 4 channels, then there's very low supply. So all of our attention flows to those 4 sources, and there's a maybe bigger impact or at least reach. And then if you expand that supply out to 40 and then 400, and then Netflix and LinkedIn and a podcast and a newsletter, it's like every individual part of that may have less reach. And also like the trend that I'm seeing is maybe some of this it's less centralized in the hands of like media outlets, and more so like I'm seeing a lot of tech companies and founders go direct to their audience, like through maybe social media or through like their blog or something like that. Yes. Too. It seems like it's less One example that I remember back when I first got into tech is like, it was a huge deal when you got a TechCrunch article written about you.
Oh, yeah.
I could not tell you the last time I read a TechCrunch article, and that's nothing against TechCrunch, but like,
no, it's great.
it's there's so much noise that like, to me, a TechCrunch article is like barely different than like the founder of a company just putting out a statement on LinkedIn to say like, hey, here's our funding round. You know, like those two are like very similar to me now.
Absolutely. You have to use press as part of an integrated marketing campaign, integrated marketing communications campaign. It's one of those things that getting press is so hard to get in the first place. If you're not Jeff Bezos or, Mark Zuckerberg. So when you do get it, you need to put it in a lot of different places so that people continuously see it. It's one of those things that is great for credibility. Like for new companies, you might not have a ton of customer reviews, but if you got an article in Forbes, you got mentioned in Forbes, that's third-party validation. So that's, something that can support your credibility. But then also you can use it in newsletters to show people that you're relevant. Those tend to get much higher open rates when you put that into the headline, read our article in Forbes. You can't just set it and forget it and say, okay, we got it in. The phone calls are going to come in. Did you see us in Forbes? The thing is like, probably not. Mm-hmm. Because there's just so much to look at all the time. You have to make sure that people are seeing it. And you have to do quite a lot of promoting on the other side of it to get the most out of it.
Do you still write for any publications?
I don't. I haven't done that in a while. The last one that I wrote for was Adweek, and I loved that because it was often covering the new technologies that were coming out. This was back when AI was kind of like new and so sort of an unknown in the B2B world, and people were asking, what is truly AI and what is just being marketed as AI. So I remember writing a lot about that back in those days. I don't think any of us could have seen how fast the turnaround would be with generative AI and how much that changed absolutely everything. And one of the things that has unfortunately done, I think it's taken away a lot of jobs for the media. But the thing that I keep hearing is that thought leadership is going to be taken over by AI, and I just don't think that's true. And that is because thought leadership is about leading with your thoughts. AI can only learn from what else is out there. So if AI is taking over thought leadership, I don't think that people have an understanding of what thought leadership actually is.
I'm trying to bring two ideas together, which is like the fact that you wrote for Adweek, and where else did you write? Like HuffPo? Were you writing
I wrote
for HuffPo?
Back in the day, I wrote for Huffington Post.
And Inc?
Yahoo, Inc.
Was Forbes in that or no?
I didn't know. I did one video for Forbes, but I didn't really write for them.
You've had access to like the writer, like you probably received a lot of pitches, right? From brands.
Oh my gosh. Probably like maybe 100 pitches a week, probably.
Mm-hmm. And like, there's something about thought leadership, which we should break down and decompose that idea. Cause it is like one of those ideas that's a little highfalutin, or like it's something that everybody maybe says, but like if you ask 20 different people, they might have a different definition of what it is, like brand or something like that. It's a suitcase word. But one part of it, when you say like leading thoughts, I take that to be something that's novel or interesting,
yes.
Right? And not like maybe if there's like this sea of similarity, like there's something that stands out. And I don't know what about that stands out, and maybe we could dive into that. But like maybe let's make it tangible. So like when you were writing for these publications, like what was a good pitch that like actually stood out to you and was interesting? Presumably there's some thought leadership in the brand that's kind of pitching to you to be featured in Adweek. So like when were you, I'm guessing that most emails went ignored, but like when did you like respond and say, that's a good pitch?
It was usually when they were doing something really different. I remember sometimes it was taking some entrepreneurs that were taking what was like garbage and turning it into art or something like that. It was people helping their communities in very interesting ways. It was basically these incredible business models. Sometimes it was a counterintuitive story, like everybody thinks this way, but this is why we're wrong. Okay, I want to know, why do you think that? It was usually somebody that took a hard stance, an interesting perspective. The one that stands out to me with Inc., I mean, aside from getting to interview Ariana Huffington and people like that, was the Dollar Beard Club. They pitched me, their commercials were just insane. It was these like bearded men on, I think they were riding like lions or something like that. They were doing these insane things in their commercials. And then when you'd meet them, they were just like these very kind, pretty soft-spoken guys. They were lovely, but they were taking a product and making an incredible story out of it. And it was just about having a beard, and it was beard products, but then they created this whole like almost like medieval world in their commercials. So I remember covering that one because it was interesting.
And that was in opposition to the other brands at the time, which were like pretty boring and banal, like Gillette or something like that. I don't know if like this was against the sea of like, similarity. Like was this novel at the time, this like approach to marketing and creativity?
Well, especially in the startup world where your budgets are small and you just really have to be creative. But if you saw the rest of the pitches that you get when you write for
what's a bad pitch?
Do you want to talk to my CEO? No, like
just
I don't
no
even know who they are.
information.
Like that would be and I think people would
And what
think
was your
that
question? Like who are you?
Who are you? Yeah, or sometimes a lot of the time it would just be like, do you? My CEO can talk about, and it would be some sort of like business thing that is normal, that they wouldn't have any kind of interesting perspective, and so. You would pass it up, and you unfortunately you don't really have time to answer everybody back and say why, because you're about to get another batch of 100 pitches that week, and you had to go with people that were interesting or people that fit with what your assignment was.
Yeah, I was going to say there's probably some component that's like you're doing this and it's a hard job to write interesting stories. So like there's got to be some level that you're uniquely just personally interested in this story, right? So there's something that stands out to you personally, but then I'm sure you have incentives, right? Like maybe you have a beat or like maybe you have a theme that you write about. You're talking about AI and Ad Week, and it's like, how does the pitch play into what your incentives are? Like, what's in it for me? Like what's in it for Molly?
Yeah.
Like that's like gotta be some calibration. And when that doesn't fit, when it's like, we've raised $1 million, like here's our company. You're like, and
what is it? Yeah. And that's so awesome. And it's not to say that anybody, that it's not to take away from anybody, but it's just when other companies are doing that and you have limited time as a writer, and also you're getting assignments from your editor sometimes. So like for Ad Week, it was, I need you to cover interesting things that people are doing on Facebook Live, because that was new at the time. And so it would be interesting campaigns, sort of like the most creative campaigns that people were doing. And so really it was about taking a perspective. The other thing is kind of like predicting the future is always kind of cool. Like, there's a book called The Challenger Sale. Have you heard of that, read it?
Yeah, this is an older book, right?
Yeah.
Challenger Selling or something. I think I read this in like 2014 when I first got into the startup world.
You probably did.
No, I remember it being like very like revolution, because I didn't know much about sales. And that was the first startup I joined. We had to do sales calls and write sales scripts and all that stuff. And it was very much like high volume, So like I read that book and I remember that was formative for me in my sales approach.
Yeah.
So it was like you educate people, you're like a consultant, you're not like you're not pitching, right? Like it was like you challenge them on their worldview and you say, maybe you should think about things differently. Is that the gist of it?
100%. I read that book because I was required to. I was the head of branded content for Clary, and they had us all read this book because because the product was about selling, you know. And one of the interesting things I found about it was that it was teach your customers what they don't know about their business. And that always stood out to me because I think all of us have been pitched to where you, and have pitched where you want somebody to know, like, I've done my research on you. I know that your company does SEO and you specialize in B2B tech. Okay, you've read up on me, but I know those things too, you know, is kind of the idea. Tell me something that I don't know. And it's the challenger methodology would be more like, this is where your industry is going, and here's how you need to be prepared, and here's how we're going to help you. I think of thought leadership as being the same way, because sometimes people will say thought leadership is like how-to articles. I wouldn't personally classify those as thought leadership. I think those are something else. Thought leadership is you need to be able to steer the direction where people know that you are at the cutting edge of your craft, and that you are not just looking at this year, you're looking 5 years ahead, and you're telling people what they need to be prepared for, what's coming. And I feel like those always make the best pitches. Those make the best thought leadership. And also there's all of these studies that are coming out. And I think LinkedIn and Edelman was the last one, where they said people value thought leadership more than like sales sheets. They see more credibility in it because they're sort of getting to see how you think, and if they want to learn from you, if they want to be taken along your journey. So that's my soapbox on thought leadership today.
I have many more questions, actually, because the first point that you made on the Challenger sale resonates. It's the approach that I've taken kind of implicitly and just like naturally in the past. But recently we did research on, we interviewed like 30 marketing leaders who hold decision-making power and budget over how they allocate kind of customer acquisition resources. So like they may invest in SEO, they may invest in paid, they may invest in PR, but they're essentially decision makers who are looking forward for this year, for next year, for how to build their brands, right? And we heard a lot of different themes. Like one reason we did this was to get kind of boots on the ground and figure out like what people in the field doing the work, making the decisions care about, not just what everybody's talking about on LinkedIn or something like that.
Right.
And one theme that came up over and over again was there's so much noise. We don't necessarily, people would bring up AI, but it was kind of all over the place. Like there wasn't like drastic fear or over like, oh, is SEO going to die? And there was like not exuberance either. It was just kind of a question mark, right? It was like, what is going on here? And we had several people explicitly say, as an agency partner, what we would love is if like you guys have all this data and like you have tons of clients and hopefully you have pattern recognition, right? Because we only see our context, but you have maybe 20 or 30 different companies and maybe 5 or 10 are similar or are doing similar things. So can you come in and use that data and pattern recognition to tell us what we should be thinking about? They were basically saying like, tell us what to do, like give us a blueprint or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, and it was like that to me is like very rooted in some sense of data, right? And then on the flip side, when you're talking about like where the puck is going, that's where I get a little bit more hesitant because I'm a little like I'm, you know, to me it requires vision and conviction, and like vision, I've got that, you know, by the truckload.
Absolutely.
But conviction, like if you ask me like where AI is going and how it's going to impact search in 5 years, I've got some theses, but I don't necessarily know. Like there's almost like a couple things that would have to play out. And if they don't play out, then the trajectory could be quite different. So it's hard for me to say like, all right, take all of your money right now and put it into this channel because in 5 years it's going to be huge, you know? Like that feels like a scary thing to make a proclamation for.
For sure.
So is that, I guess, like, I don't know, maybe I'm like, I'm misdefining thought leadership in like the most extreme version, but like what?
Or I mean, like maybe even 5 years from now, if you can also just like get people to current realities, like for example, in PR, a lot of people will say, well, okay, we'll get press and we'll put out a press release. that is not how you get press nowadays. That was back when really you had to push out the information to a bunch of people all at once, and it was assuming that it was big news. Some people put out a press release thinking like, we're going to get inbound. Really, you talk, me and some other people that do publicity a lot will say you only put out a press release when the story is dead. It's as if you can't get anything else. You've already pitched different journalists. They're not interested. You're putting that press release out as like a last-ditch attempt. But people still cling on to that because that used to be the way that you did it. And now, I mean, it hasn't really been that way for like, don't quote me on this, but like maybe 15 years. But people are still doing that because that was part of our history. So like, I'm not sure exactly what that is for SEO, but is there a thing where you're looking at where people are just kind of holding on to ideas that are not true anymore because everything has moved so fast?
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I think like maybe this is getting too in the weeds on the SEO stuff, but we've had some I guess like tailwinds for like the ideas that we've held true for like the entire time that we've run the business. So we talked about this. We did a podcast a couple of days ago in the same studio I was telling you about. And one like contrarian idea that we had in 2018 or 2019 was that SEO and content should drive attributable business results. It should be like gold on like metrics that matter for the business, not just traffic. And we developed this kind of idea called the traffic trap, which is like if you only measure if you're like, you know, incentives dictate behavior, like that kind of economics principle. If your SEO team and your content team are gold on traffic, that's what they're going to obsess over. And then they're going to game like the work that they do, the actions that they do to hit traffic numbers, which sometimes diverge from actual business relevance. So in like the now famous sense, HubSpot ranked for the keyword shrug emoji. It was like how to make a shrug emoji, right? And it brought in a ton of traffic.
Yeah. Because
everybody from like a high school student to like, you know, your grandma might Google how to make a shrug emoji or something like that. But what did it have to do with a CRM? Like pretty much nothing, you know, and that was this idea that we had, which is this divergence of like, you know, the goals that were set up for these programs and what actually drives business results. Well, now a lot of that's coming to fruition because AI overviews and ChatGPT and like the quick access to answers and information is making it so there's no longer a feasible case to say that that traffic was valuable because it's disappearing, right?
100%.
And what's happening is the leads and the revenue that the businesses are generating is the same or higher, even though the traffic is going away. So everybody's like, well, what was the value of that traffic in the first place? So now we've got this trend that kind of backs up our original contrarian POV, and it's kind of like now no longer contrarian. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. But it's no longer contrarian because you've basically proven that all of that traffic was meaningless?
I think a lot of market trends, like a lot of like the ZERP era, kind of like, you know, just pump a bunch of money and like metrics go up, we'll figure out how to monetize it. Like that's over. So there's kind of like market dynamics. And then there's the AI stuff and like the easier access to those questions and answers, which were already kind of going away because you had like featured snippets that would just be like, you know, if you want like a quick definition, like you just hop on and you're like, all right, what is content marketing? And you get a quick answer and then you go about your day, right? So there was already these trends in place. But yeah, it's like the sort of illusory charts that made it look like your strategy was working, they're falling apart.
Vanity
like
metrics.
Those charts are falling.
Yeah,
so it's like now everybody's got to kind of reorient and re-underwrite like what the expectations for the program is. And but like before, I guess to your point on thought leadership was like we did stake a claim. Right? Like in opposition to most content marketing, specifically content marketing, but then also SEO agencies, we made our value proposition much more aligned with like a growth marketing agency.
Yes. Well, I think that there is an equivalent in that with thought leadership specifically. Okay. Go down the rabbit hole with me a little bit. I had this conversation with a CEO a few years ago who wanted to do a very, very deep, specific piece for chief revenue officers that was very like you had to have an MBA to understand what this thing was. And he said, I want this to go viral. And unfortunately, I said, it won't. It's not broad enough to go viral. It will resonate with who it resonates with, and that will be cool. But like viral is for something that's much bigger. And me and myself and the other person working on this had both of us had articles that went viral. But if you looked at what those were, hers was a chocolate chip cookie recipe by science, and mine was about why women shouldn't bully each other, cyberbully each other. They were very broad topics. My other one was about like body shaming. This was like 14 years ago when people weren't talking about it quite yet. And it didn't matter what job you had or, what walk of life you're from. You probably love chocolate chip cookies. Like chances are good. Or if you're a woman, you've probably experienced some form of this kind of bullying that I was talking about. So those things had good opportunities to go viral. But these very niche subjects, they're great for who they're great for. And the impulse with some people is to let's make them go viral because that means it's better, instead of let's really just focus and write them for the people that they are for. Which brings me to my question for you about micro audiences, because it's not so sexy for press to say like, it didn't go viral, or maybe only 500 people read this, but it was the right 500 people. Mm-hmm. What does that look like in SEO with like what you're talking about, where you're not trying to reach a broad audience, you're trying to reach the right audience? Has that sort of changed with these micro communities that are now so popular?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. I think that's where maybe the conversation is shifting, like market wide, and it's hard because everybody's got a different context. But that's something that I've always cared about more. I've given this story an example before, but like I post on LinkedIn all the time because that's an effective place to reach business decision makers, right? Yeah. It's the social network. It's kind of our digital water cooler, and there's certain tactics that you can use to go quote unquote viral. Like you can use kind of clickbait and emotional like bait, right? Like you can kind of bait people into like debating in the comments section and make it like a reality TV kind of motif. But does that attract like a discerning CMO or CRO or somebody who may eventually make a decision as to like whether or not to invest in SEO? Questionable, right?
Right.
So in the past, like what I tried to do is I worked with an agency that like wrote my LinkedIn post for a while, and I gave them guardrails around like the topics, but how they wrote them was like filled with just like emojis and clickbait. And they would have like, comment, give me that template if you want this template. And it would garner like thousands of likes and hundreds of comments, and it would go viral. Like it would like 100,000 impressions, not a single lead, And nowadays, like I write and I probably get like 20 or 30 likes. I get a handful of comments. But when I look at the people commenting and the people who, like through self attribution, like when they come in as leads, they say, oh, I follow you on LinkedIn. It's the right people, but it's probably like 1/10 or 1/100th of the audience that I got when I hired that agency that was doing all that very salacious, very like sensational content, So I'll take the 100 people over the 100,000 every day if they're the right people.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the same is said with press. Like, there's always that question when you're working with a client or a company that is looking to get press. How many people read this? Well, we can't really tell you that because the platform will not give us that data. And back in the day, the only thing that you could do as a, PR firm is to say, well, we booked you in this platform and they get 10 million unique monthly visitors. Now, it looks like, 10 million people are going to see your article. That is absolutely not true. And it never was, because that is for the entire site, the entire platform. And the truth is that you don't know, you can't give those numbers. So that's why that I'm advocating for people that do include press in their marketing mix, use it wherever you can and try to get your metrics in different ways. Try to measure it by open rates on your newsletter. Try to measure it by impressions on your LinkedIn, that kind of way. And then, get creative with it too. It's not enough anymore to just go, oh, we got into all of these publications, or our CEO was mentioned or quoted in these things. It's not going to drive marketing dollars. It's not going to support your revenue unless you make it integrated into whatever else you're doing.
Mm-hmm. So I think you're much more creative than the average marketer, especially in B2B.
Thank you.
And I want to I'm seeing things in 2x2 matrices, as I always do, but there's the level of attention, and then there's the level of relevance. And it seems like both of those need to be calibrated for, let's say, an effective thought leadership campaign or marketing campaign. You need to reach the right people, which would be the relevance dimension, but then you need to make sure that it stands out and is interesting or entertaining, or in some way stands out. So that's the attention dimension. So if that's right, I mean, that might not be right. Let me know. How have you crafted campaigns that kind of stand out, right? They're more interesting than the average campaign among your competitive set, or among the other options that your target audience could care about. And then how do you make sure that reaches the right people? You can, if you can give examples, that'd be great too.
Absolutely. I love video. And my first career was in production. And I think I said earlier, my husband's an actor. I'm around actors a lot, and that is really helpful to me. My dad is an actor. My husband's an actor. I used to be one. And that is how I think in terms of emotion, human connection, and all of that. So, a few years ago, oh God, it was way more than a few years ago at this point, I went back to school to be an editor, a video editor. And it was one of the best things I could have ever done, because I learned about the ways in which people take in information just based on what people might infer about you, judging by the clips that are coming before and after you. For example, this was a thing that blew my mind back when I was learning. It was called the Kuleshov effect, and it was an editing study that they did back in the early days of film, where they wanted to understand how audiences saw a story. And they got this famous actor, and this was in the silent film days, and they put him in front of the camera and just said, just look this way, So it's this guy just looking forward. And they took that clip of him, not knowing he wasn't acting, he just was looking. And in one clip, they cut him and then a little girl, him and then a bowl of soup, him and then a beautiful woman. And in each audience would watch whichever piece that they did and go, oh my God, what a great actor. He's so hungry. Look at him looking at that soup, or oh, he misses his little girl. He loves his little girl so much. Oh, he's passionate about this woman. The man wasn't doing anything different. It was the same clip. It was just before and after. And so you realize that human perception is malleable, you are basically, we can tell people what story we want them to hear by what we craft, and how powerful that is, especially with visual and audio. So I took those things that I learned from a long career in my young life as a theater actor, and put those into B2B. Because it was fun, and because I wanted just to make things interesting. So in some cases, I might take a piece of press and then make it into a newsreel, and then put different stories about the board members talking behind it, so that it looked more like a documentary. Sometimes I would do it during the pandemic. I turned my basement into a studio because what else were we going to do? And created a talk show that was more like CNN, using the same kinds of television formats where there is an intro, there's a main story, there's an interview. You're always giving somebody something different to look at. And so that's kind of where I draw my inspiration, is just television formats.
So is your mental model to take the perception or the emotion that you want to create and then work backwards into the format that would be necessary for that? Is that what I'm getting from that? What was the effect called? The
Kuleshov effect.
Kuleshov
Russian filmmaker.
Right.
Yeah.
And like, if you look at those three different arms of that like ABC test, right? Like one was hunger, one was longing, one was like daughter or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that would be like the end emotion or perception that the audience would feel. And then you back into that and kind of create the components that would lead to that reaction. Like, am I reading too much into this to say that you start with the end in mind as to like, what emotion do I want to evoke, right? Like that CNN style show, I'm sure that evokes something around like the credibility or like the maybe seriousness of the message that you're trying to get across, which would be a much different reaction with the same exact content in like a sitcom style show.
Absolutely. It's exactly what you're talking about. It's taking that end emotion. What do you want the audience to feel? And then working backwards from that. And a lot of the time in business, we want people to feel smart, empowered, knowledgeable, and a lot of it is about Kuleshov, like what clips are you using that make them feel this way? And the other one is another film technique is mise en scène, which is like, if you see a picture of any film, like a screenshot of any film, they've dressed the set around the character and they've styled the character so that the character doesn't need to say anything before. The character doesn't need to say anything, but you need to be able to pick out who they are just by looking at them. So like in Pursuit of Happiness, you see Will Smith laying on a public bathroom floor with his son, and he's wearing a suit and he has paper towels under him and his son. If you see that, you're saying this is a professional man who is for some reason homeless, and he is a good dad and he cares about his son. All of these things that you infer about them, right? So then you can do that with videos like, you see it in politics all the time. There's an American flag behind the candidate. There are children behind the candidate. There are workers behind the candidate. You're telling the people what to think about the candidate. It's not about, we just randomly put people in the back. Those people have been styled to be back there because it's what they want you to think about the candidate. And so you can draw those things into business too. Maybe it's you're in an office and you want people to know that you're quirky and fun. And so there's like Legos everywhere, for example. So those are the kind of techniques that you can use to give people those sort of subconscious feelings about who you are or how you want them to feel about you.
This is so awesome. I don't know any of this stuff. And one thing that I love is like the idea of storytelling. And I wouldn't say that I'm like anywhere near like mastery there. Like I'm continuing to just learn about it. But it's something that I think is just like critically important as like a through line for like generally like humans are storytellers, and like, our social lives, our romantic lives, our business lives, like all across the board. If you can tell a good story, you can command attention. And this idea in storytelling that everybody repeats is like show, don't tell. And to me, this, again, what was the effect called?
Kuleshov.
No, the next one.
Oh, mise en scène.
Mise en scène.
Yes.
That's cool. It's kind of like mise en place, right? Like the table setting or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Establishment. I was watching a movie last night. The founder, it was about Ray Kroc and McDonald's. And the first scene opens up in kind of complete silence. And it's just a single shot of Michael Keaton, who's playing Ray Kroc. And he's in like a white short sleeve dress shirt and a tie that's somewhat loose fitting. And he's facing the camera, delivering a sales pitch. And I don't know why. I'm not usually this like conscious and aware of what I'm watching. I usually just get sucked into the story. But I noted that, and I was like, that's so interesting, because I knew the story of Ray Kroc. I read his like a memoir, and I've read the story of McDonald's, and I know his kind of thing is he's like a ultimate salesman. But I was like, they're framing him as a salesperson right at the start, as like a hustler, a door-to-door, like a guy who just like will persist and make the deal happen, you know?
Yeah.
And that scene, they didn't need to tell you, like Ray Kroc was what was it? What did he sell? Like a milkshake mixer salesman pounding the pavement and to his frustration until he met the McDonald's brothers, right? They showed that scene and immediately you're like, this guy's, he's trying to make something happen, right? Like he's in that like hustler sales mode of his life right now.
Absolutely. And I think also what people wear is also part of that. I mean, back when I was an actor, I did mostly theater. You're usually rehearsing in your own clothes for the majority of the rehearsal time, you know, which is, you know, a month or two or whatever, depending on how complicated the show is. Maybe if you have to wear, like if it's a thing where you have to wear a skirt, you might wear like a rehearsal skirt or something like that, just to give you a feel of the character, whatever. You notice the difference in the actor's performance as soon as costumes are put into it. All of a sudden, you're wearing the right shoes, you're wearing the right clothes, and the characters all of a sudden go from here to here. Everybody's performance is elevated. And I think also, like, have you ever been to a business meeting where you're just like, you love what you're wearing? You're like, I have the right shoes on, I look awesome, and I'm going to nail this. Have you like...
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about like when I was in high school and I dressed like a punk rocker and then I went to prom and I wore a tuxedo and the difference in how I felt, I was like, wow, I'm real suave now. Like I'm just like real smooth.
Yeah.
but like your persona kind of alters subtly in the moment. Yeah.
And you kind of do a better job when you feel like you look the part. So
we think about that, by the way. We're conscious about that with Omniscient and how we present ourselves. I think that's something that's not as common in agencies, specifically SEO agencies, and in tech. There's a lot of people, I think, like when I lived in Austin, it was like flip-flops and a startup tee and shorts. And like we deliberately, I don't know if it was because I moved to New York City and everybody's very stylish here, but I was like, I'd like to present us as like a more professional, like we take what we're doing seriously, right? Like we dress well for calls, even when we're at home on Zoom. So I don't know if we've gotten to the level of detail, whether that's like a suit or a really cool, like artistic look. Like we haven't gotten into that level of detail, but we think a lot about that in terms of like what emotion are we unconsciously evoking in the people that we're talking to?
Right. How are we telling people how to deal with us? If you look like you mean business, then I'm going to take you seriously. Or maybe sometimes you want to relax people. I know there's people with these very commanding presences that they kind of want to dress more casual to kind of like put everybody at ease.
Yeah. And I kind of want my design agency to like wear turtlenecks or something, you know? I want them to look a little artistic.
Like do the bongo drum.
Like if they showed up wearing like a really boring suit from like Brooks Brothers, I'd be like, are you, what is this?
Yeah, I need it to be like a Nirvana shirt or something.
Vintage. I want like a vintage outfit that's like, that's cooler than I would have thought to wear.
Yeah. But see, all of those things that we're talking about, the coolest shot, the mise en scène, the costumes or what you're wearing, you know, your wardrobe, those are all things that, you know, people, when you study communications, people make shortcuts, take shortcuts to decide how they think about you. They do the same when they're looking at your story. So if you're doing an interview, if you're making a video, decide what's around you as your first step, because it's going to set the tone. It's going to give people the vibe.
I think in some sense what you said, that you know, people make shortcuts, like they have heuristics in their mind because there's a lot of information. And I think a lot of like cognitive processes happen beneath the surface layer. You know, it's like a lot of unconscious things that are going on that we don't know are happening when we make decisions. So like reaching for this box of cereal versus that box of cereal. I don't know if you could probably make up a story for why you made that decision, but I feel like a lot of it's actually beneath your awareness. And I think in some, this term brand, again, I mentioned earlier that I think a lot of people have different definitions of it, but I simplify it and I'm like, it's kind of just the heuristic that people make, like about the association with like your kind of gestalt, like, and it could be as a person too, like as you're talking about this, like in how you dress, right? Like it's a little heuristic, it's your brand, it's an emotional connotation, it's something that happens beneath the surface layer that says like HubSpot, orange, fun, quirky, like Salesforce, professional, blue, like
it's part of their
large,
goal.
like
it's part of their culture.
And you just, as a decision maker, when you're thinking about those things, and then there's the other layer, which would be the attention, right? Like how many people are aware of HubSpot or Salesforce or the myriad other CRMs. And that's just like, how do you get in that shelf space in somebody's mind? But when it comes down to the decision, it's really just like, what shortcut are people making when they're thinking about you versus that other person?
Absolutely. That's a really good point.
Mm-hmm. This is all, so I want to dive deeply into video content. It's one of those things that like since 2015, 2016, every year I feel like people are like, this is the year of video. And I still see, I mean, you've given some examples of the consumer context, like the Beard Club one. And I think consumers tended to do better in video as a medium. But B2B, I think, is now getting on board. And I'm seeing companies launch like video series, not just webinars that are just tutorials on how to do something, but they're getting a little bit more creative and what's that word? Edutainment, right?
Edutainment, yeah. Kind of like stuff that you would see on National Geographic. Or I guess National Geographic is the only one I could think of right now, but they do those edutainment, brain games, etc.
Are you relatively like aware of the state of kind of B2B marketing and like how people are using video? Like, do you have a grasp? Like, are you seeing the same trend play out? Or
there's a trend that I really hope comes to fruition because I think it's really, really cool. And consumer brands are doing it at this point, but I am noticing some B2B companies are starting to follow suit, which is brand-funded films. Mm-hmm. And that is a genre that is actually has its own sanctioned event at Sundance. And these are films that brands fund, because it's brand-funded films, but they're not about the brand at all. So, for example, Yeti did one last year called 1,000 Casts. That was about a fisherman that travels all over the world and teaches people how to fish. And it was about all of the, successes and perils of his life. I think in one scene he wears a Yeti hat. That's it. It's not about Yeti at all. But it is just a really, really wonderful film that kind of speaks to the ethos of the company. So, Sephora did this beautiful one on beauty standards. And if you watch some of these, you'd go, I didn't know that a brand was behind it at all. But they're using it as part of their activations. They're going to film festivals, et cetera. And this is on the rise for a few reasons. People can skip through commercials now. This gives a chance for the brand to connect with people. Gen Z especially really wants to do business with companies that share their same ethos, that do good for the world and things like that. And then also the third-party cookies updates. All of these things are sort of converging so that these brand-funded films are becoming a thing. Chick-fil-A, Salesforce, they both started media companies, and you'll see things all the time about how every company is going to become a media company. I think that this is true. This is something that I saw a while ago that I sort of accurately predicted that some of these tech companies might compete with streaming networks. I'm not always accurate in my predictions, but this was one of my this is one of my good ones. And it's really cool because the content is very high quality. It's extremely story driven. It's also done on traditional formats, film, documentary, talk show formats that are tried and true. So yeah, I will say that B2B players are starting to get into that mix, and I really hope that they do, because there's some cool stuff out there.
Other than Salesforce, do you know of any top of mind examples of B2B companies doing it?
I don't know about like launching their full streaming platform like Salesforce did, but I know that Okta did a really cool documentary film about their company. This was during the pandemic. This all kind of came out of the pandemic.
Which I couldn't imagine, nothing against Okta, but like a more boring product, right? It's security.
It was security, but the film was about how their company blew up. And it was, so they added all of these like very emotional levels into it from what I saw. There's been other ones that usually I'm seeing people that do shorts. Sometimes it's around what they're doing socially. So they make it about like diversity or something that's a more broad topic that everybody can relate to, not security.
A little broader than like email marketing or CRM or something like that. Like you're not going to make maybe a documentary about how you built the next gen CRM, but like, I don't know, there's going to be maybe salespeople, productivity, like I'm going out a layer, and like they're interested in it, but it's like this outer layer of the bullseye, an outer rung, and hopefully gravity works its magic and pulls you into that center of the bullseye eventually, but it's not necessarily like point blank, here's our product, here's a documentary about our product.
No, like, okay, let's think of one for Omniscient. So,
well, we did a magazine. Right. And
that magazine was wonderful.
I mean, it's not video, but it's like there's no pitch for SEO agencies in that magazine. There's only, I think, one section that talks about our business. It's mostly just like the showcase of the people that we've interviewed. Right.
Absolutely. And it's very, very heartfelt, which is why you want to read it, because all of us are at work all the time. We don't want to read about work, but we want to read about how it makes us feel or the heart behind it.
I didn't want to interrupt, though. We should think of one for Omniscient. So
let's
go.
No,
what should we be making?
No, but that's what I mean is like SEO is very, very technical. I know, like my friend, when you have told me about SEO, sometimes I'm like, okay, what's that acronym? No, okay, walk me back on that one. But for you guys, you're three friends that started a company how many years ago?
We started it on the side in 2019 when we worked at HubSpot, and then full-time in 2022.
That's right. And so if you were to say like things that are not about SEO that have been important to you that you've learned through this journey, or things that are things about your culture that you promote, what would those things be?
That's a tough question because we probably all have different answers on like an individual basis. So I'd want to have the conversation with David and Allie and figure out what the commonalities are. And I'm sure those exist, but I don't know if I could like speak for them. Right. Like I'm thinking about like for me, like punk rock and skateboarding and like, I don't know, some of the rebellious youth stuff. David has a dance background, right? Allie's like literature. Like I'm trying to think of like how these would converge, but I don't know. Yeah.
Well,
and probably there's like a deeper layer too, because I'm just talking about hobbies at that point, but like there's probably some more like how we grew up and like, what chip on our shoulder exists and like that. Maybe we all have some semblance of the same chip and that is what motivates us or something like that. Am I even thinking about this the right way?
Well, yeah, it could be about you guys. It could be about you three being digital nomads. That was one of the things that you were doing this at a time where being a digital nomad was different. I've told you this. I've told you this before.
It was cool back in the day. I mean, now everybody does it.
Now everybody does it. And before it was like, whoa, he's just traveling all around the world, scuba diving and like working when he wants to.
Now I'm the boring one who just stays in New York all the time and I don't do the nomad stuff. But
it's like you don't want to conform to what everybody's doing.
The ever contrarian nature of myself. Yeah, I always have to be the hipster.
Yeah, I was going to say, so it's like if it was back then, I would talk about like the digital nomad lifestyle, especially because all three of you have these very diverse hobbies or skills that are outside of your work, dance.
But this is getting to the idea that maybe there's a story that's more personal than like the what we do or who we sell to. And it's more about like the DNA of what makes us different. from like more of an emotional standpoint. That's kind of where we're getting.
I mean, I thought about it too. There was one pitch that I did a few years ago that was about what does it take to be the best at a thing. Like, take sales. What I wanted to do was get like the best salespeople in the world into a room together and take assessments and reviews with psychologists, maybe like Myers-Briggs tests, having all of these different like maybe trials that they go through to find out what is it about them that makes them good at this. Because there is an audience for that. There are, I forgot what the number is, but there's like several million people in the United States work in sales. And I'd argue that all of us are sellers in some way. We're selling ourselves. We're persuading somebody to do something most of the time. So if I was going to do it, I would talk about like the world's most persuasive people. What is it that they're doing? Like, you can break that down. There are shows like that where it kind of breaks down the science behind our brains, like The Mind Explained, for example, on Netflix. So you could also talk about people in your industry, like what makes somebody that's good at dance also good at math. Like, let's explore that. And that could be a documentary piece. So it's about taking a little something about your business, the ethos behind your business, and blowing it out into a story, a human story.
See, that's very like you're showing your creative brain here. Does that level of like creativity and how you're thinking about things, is that natural to you? Is this something that people can develop, like that style of thinking? I think like a lot of people in B2B are a little bit more linear and a little bit more left-brained, right? Like there's a lot of spreadsheet analysis, which is great. I'm a big spreadsheet guy, you know?
Yeah.
But I can flip that off and I can go over to the right brain and the realm of the romantic and the creative, right? Like I can do both. Like, is there something that marketers, either ICs or marketing leaders, can do to like shift into that mindset more? Like, have you had this your whole life? Like, you think like a creative, you know?
I was lucky. My dad is an actor. And so I did my first play with him when I was 8, my first professional play when I was 12 or 13. And he would sit there with me in the audience. And these would be like adult plays. These were not like kid shows. Like my first one was Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, which is like, has a lot of themes in it that are like very, very deep. But my dad would sit there with me and say, why do you think this character is so mad? Well, what's the temperature in the room? What's the hottest day of the year? It's 110 degrees. He said that. What are other people saying about this character? Well, they say that he's a drunk. They say that he's a liar. You know, how do you think that makes him feel? So he was constantly sort of tapping my brain into like, how I didn't realize this at the time, but it was emotional learning, you know, where you're trying to understand a person and break down a person. But then just like with things theatrical, you're like, how do I convey that this is a war and I have 6 people, not 30 people? What can we do with the set to make it look like it's, you know, a huge battle when it's not? And so I wasn't the one deciding those things, but I was around the people that made those things. And so it does something to you where you go, oh, it's simpler than that. So to answer your question, I think it can be taught. I think everybody's creative. I think that it's just a muscle that after a while, it just becomes second nature to you. And I'm working with this incredible art director right now, creative director. And he's just one of those people that like, he sees things B2B wise, but when you tell him, no, it's more like, you know, it's more like this show on Netflix. He's like, oh, got it. And it's just, sometimes I think we just need to frame our brains in the right way. You
Or
know?
like there's what I got from that was there was some intentionality early on, and might botch this, but there's a framework for learning and mastery that's like you start out and you're unconscious incompetent, which means you're not aware that you're bad, right? Which, let's say like I wanted to learn the piano, I would know that I was bad, right? Like if I just like listened to a piece of jazz, I'd be like, all right, Thelonious Monk can play better than I can, right? But like I'm not aware of the level to which I could achieve. And then you enter this phase of conscious incompetence once you start to practice scales and you're like, oh, these are really hard. Like I need my fingers to be trained a certain way and I need the knowledge. And then you enter conscious competence, where you're aware, you can see the frameworks, you're intentional about what you're doing. And then eventually you hit this stage of like unconscious competence, where it's like you're John Batiste and you're like seeing the music notes in the air as they're coming to you. And you're just like fully in a flow state or something like that. But to start that journey towards that place where you're like on a podcast, just riffing on brand campaigns and creative acts, before that, you have to, you go through the uncomfortable, intentional, you're analyzing like why a painting is as effective as it is. You're analyzing a Dali painting and you're like, oh, well, I wonder what techniques he did here, right? But you're very focused in the beginning stages and you get through these stages and eventually you're thinking like a creative.
Well, 100%. I think the best piece of advice I ever heard was from a film teacher back in the day, where he said, the room full of people were watching a film, and it was a film of like masterful people going, well, they really missed this and this wasn't very good. And, oh, this actor, he missed this beat. And the professor said, don't talk about something so much that you think that you've done it yourself. And that hit me. And I've tried to pass that on to everybody that I can, because it's so much easier to talk about a thing than to actually struggle through it. Mm-hmm. And you have to just struggle through it with creativity. I would say that if you're doing it for the first time, just be kind to yourself and go, hey, this is probably going to suck. Like the first one is going to suck, but there might be like one little good thing about it. And then I'm just going to take that good thing about it and I'm going to build on it for the next time and just be patient about it. But I think some of us get stuck in the critique mode because it's easy to be a critic. And then you can turn that on yourself. And then that stops people from being creative. And it sucks because that's why people don't exercise the creativity that they probably do have. They're afraid.
Yeah. If practice is a function that makes you a master at something, and the amount of time you spend practicing makes you better at it, I would rather spend that time practicing the thing and not being the critic about the thing. I don't want to be the world's best critic. I want to be the world's best at the thing, right?
Yeah.
Just as a conscious choice.
Yeah. And then you also find that it makes you kinder towards other people because you're like, hey, I know how hard that is. And then you become a better collaborator for people because eventually you run into problems that you're like, I have run into that problem too because I've struggled through it too. So that way you just get yourself on a good team and you build yourself up. But you were a musician though, like
not like a John Batiste musician.
No,
I was
but like you,
a Blink-182, But yeah,
you were good enough to like you went to school for it, didn't you?
For a semester. Yeah.
So like, okay, like I can't play an instrument. I'm not good at like technical.
No, I got to the point where I was like consciously incompetent, and I realized that I wasn't going to pursue that as a career because I saw the path in front of me, and I just saw like the path that preceded me too, and like how many people had been playing music at like a high level since they were like a child, right? And I was like playing punk rock chords with my friends in the garage. But that was a conscious choice that I made, which was this is going to be for fun and I'm going to completely enjoy this, but I'm going to let go of the expectation of becoming like a top 1% musician. But I know the process by which it takes, it's like it's practice, right?
Absolutely.
How do you get to Carnegie Hall?
Oh, 100%. It's so funny. I have a new aunt. My uncle got married to this like insane violinist. Like she travels the world and everything. And she says, I'm not good at cooking because all I ever did was violin.
Yeah.
And
that's
and like
legit.
she burns stuff and everything, and she's so cute. I don't think she burns that bad, but she's this incredible violinist. But she was just like, I didn't have time for anything else. That's what I focused on. And you realize how many hours go into a thing like that.
You can't really have like the highest level of taste or like detail orientation in every area of your life. That would be completely exhausting, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
one thing I wanted to ask, by the way, so like we're talking about the creative parts, but like there's something I'm maybe going to be pulling some strings together that don't exist, but like let me know. In your bio, I noted that you before you mentioned you were a marketing, you mentioned you were a marketing leader in the last part, but earlier in the two paragraphs, you mentioned that you have lent your creative skills to numerous public companies and high growth startups. But then later you mentioned that you're a marketing leader. So I'm guessing that this is, I don't know if that was intentional, but you maybe started out as a creative and learned your way into being a marketing leader. And those are two highly different skills.
Yes, this was one of these things that I was an actor. I went into production, and then I came from a family with not a lot of money. And then just we were people that kind of got by just about like being creative, but then at some point I got into some personal things that I had to take care of people at a very young age. So I went into marketing. I gave up being an actor to go into marketing because it made more money and I had people to support. And so I for a long time I felt like, oh God, like I don't know what I'm doing. I got thrown into marketing and then just happened to be good at it. And by 25, I was the head of marketing for a surgery center, and we grew it into like a $50 million business. And it was literally because of a video campaign that I did. Like, it was not like I felt weird even calling myself a marketer, because it was, to me, just making videos that people liked, and then they came and they did business with the company. And that's always how I saw it. I went into PR because my situation had changed. I was starting to make some good money. And then I was like, well, I need to sort of bridge this gap. I used to be an actor, and then I've been a marketer, sort of. And I found out about public relations, and I was like, oh, publicists, they work with producers. I used to work with producers as an actor, and they're kind of like marketers. So I felt like they were like, I don't know, it was like a hybrid of the two things that I did. And so that's why I ended up, going that way. But the reason that I say it that way is that I would get hired to just either be a writer for those places, to do videos for those places, so do some sort of creative campaign, like as a client. And then the two places that was a marketing leader, that's like I physically worked there as like the head of communications or the head of branded content.
It sounds like there were some things that naturally, due to your creative upbringing, were less frictionful than they would be for others, such as myself. Like anything, if I were asked to come in and do a video campaign for this first startup that I worked at, I would not have been able to do that, right? So for you, that was like a little smoother. But were there other things, moments, experiences where you felt a sense of maybe bewilderment or friction or frustration in the career ladder, in becoming a business and marketing leader? Were there moments where you were like, I don't have the vocabulary for this. I don't have the past experience or the mental model to do XYZ, whether that's like, I don't know, make budget decisions or pitch an idea, or like, were there moments where you felt blocked, right? Like as you maybe stumbled into that path on the marketing leadership side?
Most of the time. Yeah, no, it was one of those things that I was successful at it, but it was really because of the creative part. But then when I would call, like, real marketers would talk, and they talk about like segmentation and all of these things, my brain would just go like, I'm not a real, I don't belong here because I don't know what you're talking about, and so with PR, getting to learn how to do that, I mean, I became a writer for Inc. because I pitched them. Like I was just testing it out, like to see how it worked. And then they said, would you like to come and be a writer for us? We like this. So I felt like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I'm a creative. That doesn't mean I'm a marketer, but because of the results that it was getting, I kept just getting into these bigger places. And then, I was afraid, like all of a sudden I'm the head of marketing for like a tech company that has 500 employees. And I'm going, okay, I mean, yeah, I feel kind of like an imposter, but at the same time I have built a business, but it was all doing creative stuff. So to answer your question, it has been weird. I ended up going back to school to get a master's degree. And then some of these things that I was going, oh yeah, I thought that was the case. They are the case. And now I have the words to say that.
Is it in some sense a matter of confidence then? You mentioned imposter syndrome. Is it like,
oh yeah. Yeah.
Just kind of the self-belief that yes, I'm supposed to be here?
100%. Because I think you just do what you have to do. Like I was one of those people that was, when the iPhone came out, I was going, why would I ever use this? I don't even use a computer. So why would I use a computer on my phone? It was a weird thing that I even ended up in tech. Like it was so surprising. But I did have this sort of block that I thought I'm not technical. And when I first started going back, like for video editing, I did it because I thought you need to learn some technology. And editing is very much about being a good actor. Like you need to, for me it is anyway, you need to understand acting. And that's how you're able to edit these sort of like film scenes so that they have the right effect. And I was not good at the technical part of it, but I was good at the actual like creative part of it. But it was really just to learn a technical skill. Yeah. I don't know. Have you felt like that? Like I always feel like you were the adultier adult out of the two of us. So really? Even though you're younger than me, I'm like, he knows what he's doing. I don't know.
No, I just hide it really well.
Oh,
I've given like presentations before and I later talk about how nervous I was and people will be like, I couldn't tell at all. No, I just, I'm from the Midwest. I just hold it in,
Oh yeah, no, that's it.
Push it down.
I understand that. It's a good way to be, but it's also a terrifying way to be.
Mm-hmm. I felt much more anxious and neurotic around my career when I was young. And it was all like very self-centered, I suppose. Like I always felt like, oh, I'm not as good at this as other people, or like, oh, I'm like weak in this area. And I think that propelled me to over prepare nights, weekends, books, all that stuff. But now what I try to do, because as a founder, you're always in areas that you don't understand and you're not good at. You're not the best at, but you're not even like, you don't even understand how to do it. And luckily there's a lot of information available. You can go to peer networks and all of that stuff. But now I try to look at myself as like a conduit for the problem that I'm trying to solve. And then I take myself out of the equation and I'm like, I am here to like work through whatever this problem is. And it's not about like, if I'm the best at it or if I'm like worse or whatever, like I try not to think about myself. And then I really just try to think about like what I'm trying to accomplish. And then that opens up all these different pathways where it's like, maybe I can hire somebody to do this. Maybe I can get advice. Maybe I don't have to do this at all. Maybe, we can collaborate on something as a team. Like, and then it opens up my problem solving because it's less of like, if I fuck this up, then I'm a failure. And if I succeed, well, I'm awesome. Like I kind of remove that from my brain. And now, I mean, that was not the case.
I was going to say, was it always like that? Because like, no. I wish I had asked you about that. Like 10 years ago.
No. It was very much like when I was in my, especially like earlier 20s, I always just thought I was going to get fired like at any moment. Like they're going to find me out like tomorrow. Like it's all over. Like I always thought like it was just so much pressure on me. But yeah, less so nowadays. Now I'm just like, all right, there's a problem. We got to solve it. How are we going to solve it? Take myself out of the equation, right? Like what's the best route here? Absolutely.
And I think we have to do that anyway, because, then you're always at the whim of however you do that day. Sometimes, even if we're really seasoned, some days we're really good at our jobs and some days we suck because we're humans, and that's just how it's going to be. So if we're feeling bad about ourselves on those days that we suck, then we're always just going to be in this like crazy emotional roller coaster instead of looking and saying, it's not about the daily or even like the hourly. It's about the big picture. You're continuing to show up and work it out, figure it out. And we're the sum of our parts, I think.
I even think there's like different contexts in which like you could be the same person and have the same inputs and the same process, and like in 3 or 4 different situations, like you're going to have completely different outcomes. And like we often think the outcome is the thing, but like, you know, like if I have the same set of skills around running A/B tests, and I join company A that's like a high growth consumer app, and company B that's like a B2B enterprise, and company C that's an early stage startup, like I might do the same things and they may have completely different outcomes. So I have to like divorce myself of that idea that the input and the output are the same also. And like, there's no, I guess like I've said this before, I don't know if this is the right word, but like there's kind of an entitlement to believing that just because you do all the right things and like make the right decisions, that automatically it's going to work with the audience that you care about and in the business context that you care about, right? So like sometimes I would imagine, particularly with the creative campaigns that you have run and are talking about, there is a risk that it doesn't work, right? And I think that's something that keeps people on the sidelines, because it's like it's less certain than like a direct response campaign where you email 1,000 people and you get a 1% open rate, and 1% of the people who open respond, and then 10% of those get on a sales call or something like that. You can math that out, and you're never going to fail completely. But in some of these campaigns that you've talked about, like documentaries, there is the chance that it does zero for your business. And you might not know that because there's a long lag time between the results and the actual creation, which the creation takes a long time and it costs a lot of money. So I don't know, I feel like to actually get off the sidelines and do some of these interesting things, you have to be okay with the idea that sometimes it's not actually going to work. But then sometimes it's going to work so well that you can't even imagine why it worked that well.
Yeah. Or you also just realize that you will never have all of the answers, and that you need to surround yourself with a bunch of people that you think are incredible creatives, that you value, you trust, and you can never be afraid that they're going to critique you to death and like, oh, you're going to change my original vision. No, you need people around you that are going to support the vision, but tell you when you might be wrong, because like to your point, how do you even know if it's like you're going to spend all of this money and it's going to be good? If you look at it the way that film companies do, they do screen tests of actors. They now, like, actors get chosen sometimes based on their Instagram following because they already have a built-in audience. Like, there's all of these things, these measures that are there that kind of tell whoever's producing the thing, this is going to be successful.
There's ways to de-risk it from like at least total failure.
Yes, exactly. So like if you were going to do like a business documentary, you might align yourself with a beloved CEO, you know, like David Cancel. Like everybody loved that guy. So, you know, maybe he's a part of it. He's in it. Then you get more people because of who else is in it. You use that one person to get more really good people in it so that it can't really fail. Unless it's the movie version of Cats, because that was some bullshit. And there were a lot of good people in that one.
That could bring us down a whole rabbit hole. I want to, so we're almost at time, but I think this is kind of converging on a lot of what we've talked about before. And I don't think that everybody has a different background, right? But I don't think that you're alone in this idea that like you're creative and you have ambition and things that you want to put out into the world. And then a lot of people that I talk to in B2B are frustrated that they can't seem to get those ideas pushed through. And I do think in one sense, like you can't join a company and automatically day one be like, I need $1 million. I need to do this thing.
No.
This is, you have to like you have to earn trust. Like, for, you have to do the basics, like the singles and doubles before you hit the home run and the grand slam. In our case, what we do for say the magazine, and like we're continuing to think of creative initiatives, is we first think like, is this in our DNA? Is this like something that we have conviction about, right? Because if we don't have that level of passion and conviction, like the person who's executing it is going to half-ass it, or it's going to drop by the wayside once we have other things. So there has to be some level of like, I really want to do this. Like I believe in this idea. And then we do de-risk it as well, right? If you think about the podcast is modestly successful. So people listen to it. We've repurposed it into different formats before. That's worked. And then we did a pre-launch. We just said, hey, would you be interested? Like sign up for this wait list. And we got a bunch of people on the wait list. So we're like, okay. And then at the very worst, we'll just send it to the people who have been on the podcast and like we'll get some distribution there.
Oh my God,
so
totally.
There wasn't really a big way to fail at that. And then we've had other ideas where we scrapped them because we're like, A, we don't necessarily have the conviction for this. And B, if it loses, it's going to lose big enough where it's going to hurt, right?
Right.
But my question is, a lot of B2B marketing teams will say that they want to do creative things or even take the creative idea out, like big, bold swings. But in practice, they will default to safe, familiar formats, channels, but specifically the formats within the channels. So why do you think that happens?
I think a lot of the time it's lack of education on the big, bold project. For example, if for example, you did want to do a documentary, has anybody ever done one? Has anybody ever maybe edited one or been a part of one or seen how one is done? No, and that's scary. So it might just be that you need to get a subject matter expert that comes in and shows you like, what does that process look like? The other thing is like, that thing that they say about eating an elephant one bite at a time. I never understood that because it's an elephant, but like, it's so true though. When you see a big thing, I feel like there's a moment where an idea comes into your head. Like you see a thing and you go, I want to do that. That's the thing that we're doing. Okay, great. And then when the realities hit and go, okay, what now? Like, what's the first step? How do I do this? Well, you realize you need to chunk it out by what all of those steps are. And I think if people were able to do that, they might see it as being more palatable because it's like, no, give yourself enough of a timeline. Maybe you're not getting this done in 2 months while you're all excited about it and revved up. You're going to have to be in it for the long haul. It might take you a year. So this is what you're doing this month. And then you map it out. And then all you have to do is focus on what is right in front of you. And that's how you're going to see anything through.
Brilliant. Love it. All right. Where, I never know how to end these, but where can people find you online? Are there any like resources or links that you would point people to? We'll put them in the show notes.
LinkedIn. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for getting me out of the basement.
All right.
This was super fun,
That's
Alex.
good. Yeah,
thank
good timing
you.
Too.